Hi, everyone. My name is Anthony Ruggiano Jr., and you're watching the Angry Turtles podcast.
Ah, ha, ha. Ah. Welcome back to another episode of the Angry Turtle podcast.
Oh yeah, we are pumped. We are excited. I think everybody in the studio is excited for our guest here. I guess let's get started. We appreciate you coming on the Angry Turtle podcast.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yes.
My pleasure. I've been looking forward to it.
So when did you first recall that you were, in a mob family? Like, when was your first recollection that you had?
Well, when I was a little kid, I always felt there was something different about my father, especially than my friends' fathers and even my uncles. Some of my uncles that were all legitimate guys. And I always knew there was something different, but I didn't know what it was. Even when I went to school, when I was like 9 or 10, the teacher, we would have them classes where we're going to discuss what your father does for a living tomorrow. Because, back then, really, nobody's mother worked. Pretty much, it was, just the male, the father went out to work and the mothers were all, homemakers. And I would ask my father, what he did for a living, because I have to talk about it in the school tomorrow. And he would tell me he worked in the dry cleaners. And even at a young age, I knew that wasn't true. But, I didn't know what was true. So I rolled with it, but I just knew that was not true. But when I found out who he was or what he was when I ventured off my block when I was around 12 or 13 years old, because back then in New York, we all hung out on our blocks till we were a certain age. Then we ventured off onto the avenue. And I started hanging out by this pizzeria on 101st Avenue. And when I used to go to the corner, the older fellas, I would hear them whispering to it, saying and pointing, saying, "That's Fat Andy's son. That's Fat Andy's son." And that's when I started realizing what was going on. And then there was a couple of newspaper articles that I ran across. And then my father at that point started taking me around. Once I started hanging out in the neighborhood, he started taking me to social clubs in my neighborhood and introducing me to all these wise guys because, I was running around the neighborhood and he didn't want me to get hurt or, he wanted them to look out for me. And that's actually when I first met John Gotti. He took me to the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club and I met all of them fellas at that time when I was around 13. So when I ventured off my block is when I found out about my father truly being in the mob.
Did you ever find it difficult growing up, having a dad in the mob? Like with your peers and growing up around everybody?
I want to say I didn't find it difficult. There was some jealousy in the neighborhood with some of the guys. There was always a little, like people making sly remarks, a couple of, bullies picking on me a little bit, and I would have to fight back. But I never found it difficult personally because it really was like a feather in my cap. Then once I was hanging out, running around the neighborhood, and I realized I was Fat Andy's son and everybody in the neighborhood knew who I was. It was sort of opened up a lot of doors for me.
That's it. That is so interesting.
Yeah.
Now, your father, is it Quack Quack or did they call him Fat Anthony or?
No. That's a big misunderstanding. Angelo Quack Quack is a different person. His last name is Ruggiero.
Okay, see, I was getting it messed up.
My father was Fat Andy. Quack Quack was Angelo Ruggiero. He was John Gotti's partner.
Perfect. I'm glad that we could clear that up. Yeah, I'm really not good with the last names. That's horrible of me.
I'm not great at reading in general.
So I haven't. So just can you? What was it like just being in the social club? Like, what was a normal day like?
So people get up in the morning, they get dressed, they go to work. So people go to Wall Street, people go to their offices, people go to wherever they work. And that was our job. So we woke up, we got dressed, and we went to the club. And that was where we started our day. We'd go in the club, we'd have bagels, we'd have coffee, and, and we'd talk, play cards, whatever. And that's what we'd plan the day. People would come there to meet us, and that was like home base. My father always had a social club my whole entire life. Even when I didn't know he was in the mob, he would take me to his social club. He always had a social club. He always had, my whole entire life, he had a social club. So I grew up in them. And they were just places where we met, we ate, a lot of food, a lot of, outside walk and talks. And it was just like a home base where people knew you could be contacted and reached out to. It was like our office, basically. That's what it was.
I was probably get a little right into it, but I was listening to you before. I heard you talk about. I don't remember the gentleman's name, but hearing you talk about the guy that had put his hands on your mother, like, and like I know you were in a facility at the moment. Like, what was your mindset hearing that? And just like me personally, I know if like I was somewhere where I couldn't leave at the moment, I'd just be in a manic headspace hearing about something like that. Like, how'd you even handle something like hearing something like that?
Well, that was my brother-in-law. So I was in a treatment center. That was in 1988. It was in February of 1988. So I called up my wife that morning, the next morning after they had a baby shower for my sister, just basically to find out how the party went and did everybody enjoy themselves? Was it good? You know, how was the food? You know, basic normal stuff. And when I called her up from the treatment center because I had a drug issue and I was addressing it because I wanted to get everything straightened out in my life. And I called her up and she, said, how was the party? And, she was upset and she gave me the rundown that, my brother-in-law ran up a tab and he had a big fight with my mother. And when he got home, she heard, because we lived upstairs from my mother, she heard him screaming, my mother screaming. She ran down. He was choking her. He had her on the floor and it was a big brouhaha. And my wife jumped on him and scratched his face. He ran out of the house. I mean, I of course I got angry right away. I got a knot in my stomach, but I didn't want to just run out of the treatment center. I only had a couple of more days left, and I just and I knew what I needed to do when I got out. I needed to go right away to see my father's partner, Tony Lee, because my father was in prison, and I needed to address my issues. So I just stood. I finished out the treatment center stay, and as soon as I got out of the treatment center, I went to see my father's partner, and he already knew what happened. I went there and I told him, this guy put his hands on my mother, and he said, yeah, I know. And I said to him, what are we going to do? And he said, we're going to clip him. And that was it. That was the beginning.
Yeah, that's just, did you when you met him, did you have any inkling that he would even be capable of do something like that? Like, did he give it any signs? It was like, there's something sketchy about this dude, or?
Yeah, no, he was a bad kid. He was a dangerous kid. He was a killer himself. I mean, he was his partner, Peter Sicaro. They were dangerous. They were doing armored truck robberies. They already went to prison for robbing armored trucks. They were dangerous kids. And my sister, we told my sister to stay away from him. Even a captain in the Gambino family, Danny Marino, he came to see us when my sister first started dating him. And because this guy, Frankie, dated his niece. And he came to see us. And he told me and Tony Lee, please tell your sister to stay away from this kid. He's no good. And I told my sister, but she didn't want to listen to me. So we knew he was dangerous from Jump Street. And, none of us ever wanted her with him to begin with.
It's crazy. I guess I'm going to switch it up a little bit. Who was the funniest mob member or associate that you ever encountered? Who was the funniest? Who was the funniest?
Counted?
Yeah, there had to been one guy that was just a crackall. So,
oh my God, the funniest. I don't know, probably Quack, Angelo Quack. He used to crack me up all the time. John Gotti's partner, he was funny. Jeannie Gotti was funny. He used to make jokes all the time. He used to tell me all the time that when him and his brother John were kids and they used to run into my father, they didn't know if they should shake his hand or duck. So they used to crack me up all the time. They were pretty funny. They used to make jokes about my father and Tony Lee. He was doing nothing but a window breaker till you hooked up with Andy, all stuff like that. So back and forth. And my father too, he was funny. He had a lot of good one-liners. He was pretty humorous at times.
I actually want to try something here. I'm known for having kind of weird jokes. So I'd like to run one by you real quick, and you just give me if it's a go or a no. All right. Well, this one's from my daughter. She likes my dad has passed, but she likes to make jokes about it, which is I'm fine with. I think it's funny, but she likes to tell me. She goes, Dad, your dad went to get the milk from God, but never came back. I was like, wow. She's 11.
I don't know how to take that.
Yeah, she's 11.
That's dark.
She goes.
Just repeat that again.
I'll repeat it for you. No problem. She likes to tell jokes about my dead dad. She goes, Daddy, your dad went to go get the milk from God, but never came back.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
This is a dark joke. I know a lot of guys that left to buy milk and never came back.
That is crazy. I guess we'll switch it up again. So who was the toughest person you encountered? Who was the craziest? Or guy that you just like, I don't want to be around?
I mean, the toughest, I have to go. I mean, even though, I have to go with my father. My father was a gangster. He was tough. Him and John Gotti, and my father had another guy around him named Nicky Carrazza, who became a captain in the Gambino family. I think those three guys were the three toughest guys I met. But I met so many guys. I met Roy DeMeo. He was a killer. I met Sammy the Bull. He was a killer. I mean, I met a lot of people that were capable of committing homicides, but the toughest and fearless ones I ever met, I think, were my father and John and Nicky were probably the toughest. My father always told me the toughest guy he ever met was Albert Anastasia, and the smartest guy he ever met was Carlo Gambino. But that was on a different level than than me. But for me, it had to be my father. My father was fearless.
That's interesting.
I know Sammy the Bull recently has been getting like a lot of flack from people on the internet. Like, what are your thoughts on all that going on? Like, people really not.
I try to stay out of that. I mean, listen, Sammy the Bull is Sammy the Bull. I knew him from the street. He was always good to me. I always gave him, the respect that he was due. He always treated me well. When he saw me, he was good friends with my father. He was a killer. He was a gangster. And, these people have not, listen, a lot of people that are knocking me and Michael Francis and Sammy the Bull and Johnny A-Light and all these guys, it's because they have nothing else to talk about, really. I mean, they weren't in the street like us. I mean, listen, I was in the street I was a criminal. We were criminals. We were in the street 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. I told somebody the other day, when I was in the street, every waking moment of my life, I was trying to commit a crime. Even when I was sleeping, I was. I try to stay out of that unless I'm personally attacked, and with lies, I'll try to correct the story. But they have nothing else to talk about. Sammy's Sammy, and he did what he did.
Yeah, I mean, we all make mistakes too, and people grow, and it's so great to hear your guys' stories, honestly, because we always get it secondhand, and now it's coming like really forefront. So it's good to hear all these stories, because I've pretty much just been watching Goodfellas for the last 10 years and trying to figure it out. No, I'm joking. That was my one joke. So
Goodfellas.
I agree with you.
I knew all of them. I had personal relationships with all of them. It's a funny story about Goodfellas. So when Goodfellas first came out in the theater, of course, I went to see it, and I went to see it with a couple of friends of mine. We had our girls with us, our wives, and we all went to the movie theater, and we were all sitting. And I had no idea that my father's name was. I knew my father was great friends with all of them, and he did business with all of them for many, many, many years. Him and Paul Vario were like brothers; they were tight. And so we're in the movie theater, and the movie starts. In the very beginning, they're panning the Bamboo Lounge, and they're mentioning names. And all of a sudden, they mentioned Fat Andy, and all my friends at the same time yelled in the middle of the movie theater, "That's your father!" And like the movie theater was packed, and I'm just sitting there. It was like it was crazy, and people are like looking. But I knew them all. The movie was real. I think that's the most realistic mob movie out there. That movie and Casino. I mean, The Godfather was great, but as far as realistic stuff, I think Donnie Brasco. Goodfellas, Casino, I think those are the three movies that really got it almost 100% right.
I think it's super interesting that I'm glad that like all these mob guys now are coming out and like talking about their experiences and stuff, because before I feel like a lot of us were just relying on like movies and what people see in movies, and then people were just kind of like putting a shiny bow on it and saying like, oh yeah, but it's like, it's cool seeing like all you guys come out and be like, well, it's not always just how as great as the movies make it seem. It's like
it's more human. It's more humanistic, right?
Yeah, you guys are very upfront about it, and
it gives you like a more in depth side. And it's good to hear like a lot of the people. Everybody's like, you guys are human. A lot of times they paint you as just this like romanticized gangster, and at the end of the day, I think It is good to hear. Do you believe that speaking about all this is a good thing, or do you think that it's like, oh, we're romanticizing, violence, or do you think that it's okay to just tell your story as anybody else?
Well, for me, I mean, I can only speak for myself, the reasons why I do it. Yeah, I think my story should get out there. I mean, my whole thing is like, listen, I had it really good at one time and then I didn't, the movies, they romanticize the mob. Listen, the mob, there's nothing to romanticize about the mob. We were self-centered criminals, violent criminals. It was all about us. We were family men. We had wives. We all had girlfriends. We were good fathers. My father was a great father. He took me to the baseball game. He came to my little league games, and then he would go out and kill somebody and come home and, go to sleep, and think it was okay. There was no really success stories. I mean, my father died. He was alone and broke. John Gotti died chained to a bed. I mean, I spent 14 years in prison. It was really good when I was younger. It was all partying, the 70s, that, I was in Manhattan every night, hanging out with celebrities, it was great. And then, then you're in prison, then I had children and my children are crying in the visiting room. I went to jail. I sacrificed, I believed in, my father taught me to believe in this way of life. And when I think about it, the last time I went to prison, my daughter was 3 and my son was 13. I came out. My son was 22 and my daughter was 12. I mean, look what I gave up just for a belief in something that at the end of the day really kicked me to the curb. So I just want to let these kids out there know that, it's not all glory, it's not as glamorous as they make it out to be. I made a lot of money and I was living large and everything, but at the end of the day, it wasn't all that.
So when did the mob have like particular roles? Like you got a guy that's an enforcer, you got an earner. Like was there did people like just get in where they fit in, or was there a structure?
Yeah, I mean, there was no designations, but everybody knew who was who. Everybody knew who was capable of what. Some guys were great earners, some guys were tough. Like, listen, I knew wise guys that were broke, that were doormen and in crap games, writing numbers. Everybody had their own pecking order. You knew who was who and what was what, and everybody fit into their place. But, like my father would tell me, we would go out and he would tell me, and somebody would come over and he would introduce me to somebody and they would walk away and he would tell me, he's a good kid, he's a good guy. And that meant he was capable of killing somebody. It was like a code, like, oh, he's a good guy or he did a piece of work. That was the ultimate. That was the ultimate. If they knew you were capable of that, then you got the ultimate respect. But yeah, everybody had their own order. Who was a good earner? Who was a good earner? Like you wouldn't, if you knew a guy was a good earner but wasn't a tough guy and you had to go do some tough guy stuff, you're not going to send him. You know what I mean? You're going to send somebody that is capable of doing that. So everybody had their own slot, more or less.
Growing up, before like you knew your dad was like going out and killing people, like when you realized that at like an older age or whatever age you were, like did your mind or did your thoughts or how you saw your dad change at all for you, or was it just kind of just like that's just what my dad does?
No, once I found out he was a maid, he was in the mob and everything, then I sort of kind of lost a little bit of my own identity and I wanted to be him, and no, I was okay with it. I wouldn't say I was proud of him, but it sort of pumped me up a little bit, and he tried to discourage me. When I first went to work for him, he took me to this bar in Brooklyn, and it was like on a Friday night, and this bar was packed when we walked into it. And we walked in and we ordered a drink, because I drank, even though I was only 17, it didn't matter. I was his son. So I we got a drink. And after a while, he looked at me and he goes, you notice anything? And I went, yeah, the bar sort of emptied out. It was kind of crowded. Now it's sort of emptied out, and people were coming, hey, Andy, how are you? And he goes, yeah, you know why that happened? I said, and I had no clue. I said, no, why did it happen? He looked at me, he goes, because I'm here. I said, because you're here? He goes, yeah, because I'm here. He goes, that's how you want to live? He goes, these people left because they're afraid I'm here. They don't know if I'm here to hit somebody, kill somebody, abuse somebody, so they left. He said, that's how you want to live it. So he was trying to deter me, but I was so blown away by it. Like, wow, this is great that he got respect like that. Like I was just blown away by it. And I wanted that. I wanted it in the beginning.
You were like, Dad's kick ass. He's a fucking killer. No.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, whoa, that's Mike's right. You better get the F out of here. Yeah. My father's here.
So I'm fascinated by the picture behind you. Could you explain that portrait behind you?
Yeah. So that picture behind me was so what happened was I was in John Gotti's house many, many years ago when I just had gotten out of prison. It was like 1980. Maybe the beginning in 81, around that time, I just had gotten out of prison at the end of 1980. And I happened to be, and I was in John Gotti's house in Howard Beach. And he had and I was in his house and he had these beautiful portraits of his family on the wall, on his walls. And I said, hey, John, I said, those are really, now this is before he was the boss. He just had gotten straightened out. He was, it was the very beginning of everything. And I said, wow, those pictures are really nice. I said, where'd you get them? He says, so he laughed. He says, when he was in federal prison a couple of years ago, he met a counterfeiter. The guy was a counterfeiter. And in prison, he became a portrait artist. And he took Polaroid pictures from John and he made these portraits off a Polaroid picture. So I said, oh, wow. So I went in my wallet. I had a little black and white picture of my father and my mother. That picture was actually in my grandmother's yard. And I had a little black and white picture. And I says, you think you could do anything with this? And he goes, I don't know, give it to me. And I'll give it to him. So I gave him the picture. About a month later, he sent for me and I went to the club on 101st Avenue and he gave me that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And he gave me that.
I
have that over 40 years now. And the guy made he made from a little picture like that, a little black and white picture, he made a portrait out of it. That was my father when he was 26 years old. And my mother was actually pregnant in this picture with me.
Oh, wow.
It was 1953.
Oh, we appreciate you sharing that with us. That is dope. Actually, that's really, really cool. I need to get our producer straightened out over here. Do you got your mic on yet? Please. He doesn't have a mic. He said that he's half Italian, right? You got half blood Italian. He says with being half blood, would he be able to get into the mafia?
Only if his father's Italian. Years ago, no. But they changed it.
Is it your mother? Yeah. You're fucked. You're done for. You're done for.
If it's not his father, he's screwed.
Yeah, he better
got to be the father. But years ago, you had to be 100% Italian, but then they changed it up a little bit.
Do you feel like there was a golden period of the mafia, like the 70s, 60s, where the rules meant the rules and?
Well, for me, it definitely was when I was a kid, the 60s, I had my father, I was living, great for, all my friends wanted my father to be their father because of how he lived, going to the Yankee games. My father used to take me to all the prize fights. I saw Muhammad Ali fight, Joe Frazier. I saw we would live in this great life. And the 70s for me were really good. The 70s were really, really good. It was, I was like a prince. I never waited on lines. I'm in the city. I'm getting in Studio 54. I'm hanging out at the Ritz in the 80s, with celebrities up our ass. It was a great time. And then it got a little dark in the 80s, it got a little, after my father went to prison in 84, it got a little dark. And then in 88, when I got out of treatment between 88 and 96, for me personally, on a personal level, that's when I made the most money personally on my own until I went back to prison in 96.
Did you wear bell bottoms at studio?
Of course I wore bell bottoms. Everybody wore bell bottoms.
Oh, God. Was it?
I even had suits. I even had suits. Beautiful suits that were bell bottom,
polyester.
I'm sorry, I can't right now.
Everybody wore bell bottoms, and I even wore the shirt that's the collar out of the out of the. That's why we hated John Travolta. When John Travolta came out with that movie, we hated him. He
Oh,
copied
man.
everything. He copied everything from us.
What was the place like? Was it electrifying back then? Was it just like the place to be, or Studio
What do you
54?
mean?
Studio 54.
Oh yeah, Studio 54. But before that, my father took me to the Copacabana. I mean, it was, it was crazy. Here I am, just like in the Goodfellas. I'm going to the Copa. We're going in through the basement, up through the kitchen. I'm seeing all these great shows at the Copa. Bobby Darin. Don Wrinkles. It's funny because yesterday I was watching something on YouTube about Don Wrinkles, and he was talking about and they actually brought him after we went to see him. My father, me and my first wife Alice, my mother, my father, and Jay Black from Jay and the Americans, and his wife Kathy. We went to see him at the Copa, Don Wrinkles. And after the show, Carmine, the guy that ran the Copa for Julius Spadell, brought him over to the bar at the lounge. And he came over and he says, "Is this the guy I'm supposed to be nice to?" And he was making jokes and he was pinching my cheek. It was just a wonderful time. Yeah, but Studio 54. Hung out a lot at the Ritz at this rock club. Now it's Webster Hall, but back then it was the Ritz, and that was pretty much where we stood almost every night. Or Studio 54. I mean, I knew the owners of Studio 54. I knew them. And I was good friends with the owners of the Ritz through my father. So yeah, I was out every night. We never waited on lines. Broadway plays. We sat in the front. I mean, it was just we had carte blanche in Manhattan, all over the city.
Did you guys dance? Was mobsters allowed to dance? Are you allowed to say
Not
that?
really. No,
is that
we
a deep
weren't
dark
dancers.
secret?
No,
You
a
guys
couple
are
of my
just
friends danced. I danced once in a while. My father never danced. No, we weren't dancers. No, we would just sit there, drink, look good. But the girls still came. The girls all still went with us. We had the goods.
I know your dad was friends with Sinatra. Was he like? I don't know if you know this or not, but was he in, or was he just affiliated deeply with the mob guys?
Sinatra, no, he was in. He was in with the bosses. I mean, he was big. He was, he had a lot of juice. He knew everybody, and he was with guys out of Chicago. There's always was rumors going around that he became a made member. Whether that's true, and I know a couple of guys say it's not true. And my father always heard that rumor. He never knew if it was true or not, but he's the one that told me about it. That there was a rumor going around that they straightened him out in Chicago. But he was definitely all mobbed up. But back then they all were mobbed up, because you got to understand. Back then, the mob owned all the nightclubs, all the venues where, it wasn't like today where they play in arenas and stadiums. Back then, it was all nightclubs and discos, and, where Vegas was run by the mob. So they had to be affiliated with the mob, because the mob had all the venues. I mean, they owned all the clubs, all everything, the record labels. They were involved in everything.
That's crazy. What's the one famous person that you got to spend the most time with that really just blew your mind?
Oh man, I met so many famous people. The best night I ever had with a celebrity. I mean, I hung out with so many of them. Jay Black. I mean, I hung out with Frankie Valli. I hung out with the best. What happened to me one night was so I'm in the Ritz, which was a rock club where I told you before it was Webster Hall, and upstairs was the VIP section. It was always roped off up the stairs around the balcony. And now I'm there on a date with this girl named Jenny, and I remember her name because that was the same name as my mother. And I'm there, and I'm just the two of us, but I have a table, but I have my own table, and I'm in the VIP, and it's all roped off, and I'm sitting there waiting for the show to come. The place is mobbed. There's some old time rock guy there. I forget his name. Anyway, so the place is packed, and I'm sitting there, and I was drinking then. It was in the early, very, very early '80s, and I'm sitting there, and the owner comes over, Stanley London. He was one of the owners. He comes running over, and he's frantic, and he's going, "Oh my God, I got a problem. You got to help me." So I looked at him. I go, "Stanley, calm down. What's the matter? What happened?" He says, "I just got a call from Diana Ross. I have nowhere for her to sit. Could she please sit with you at your table?" So I looked at him and I go, "Of course Diana Ross could sit with me at my table." And the girl I'm with says, "Did he just say Diana Ross is going to come and sit with us?" And now I'm teasing. I'm going, "I'm the celebrity here, not Diana Ross." I'm teasing her. Sure enough, to make a long story short, who shows up at my table? He comes over, Diana Ross and Gene Simmons from Kiss. They were
Wow.
dating then because he used to date Cher, and then he started dating. He brings them over. He sits next to me. She sits across from me, Diana Ross. She's dressed down. She wasn't all glamorous. She was just dressed down. He had a nice suit on. I never forget. So I asked them if they wanted a drink. The waitress came over. She ordered a beer, and he ordered a club soda. And we sat, the four of us, and we talked a little bit, talked, and we watched the show together. That was how I rolled back then. Another night, his partner, Gary, comes over and he says, listen, I have an appointment later. I want you to come with me, but I'm not going to tell you who I'm going to meet. So I said, you want me to come with you? You don't want me to tell me who you're going to meet? He goes, no. He goes, just, you got to take a ride with me. So a little while later, he comes, he gets me. Now I'm with my uncle and my brother-in-law, Louis, and my uncle Junior. So we get in his car and we go to this place, and it's like it's in Soho, it's in Greenwich Village, but it's like a bowling alley, and upstairs from the bowling alley is a lounge. So we go up these crinkly old steps, we walk into the lounge, and it's like a dimly lit place, and in the corner, there's three people sitting at a table. And we walk up to the table, and it's David Bowie, Catherine Duval, and Susan Sarandon. They were in New York filming this movie back then called The Hunger. It was a vampire movie that Bowie was in with the two of them. And we walked over, and he had to meet them there. And we all sat down. And my Uncle Junior, he didn't know who Bowie was. And my Uncle Junior goes, hey, who's this English guy? I go, that's David Bowie. And then my Uncle Junior, he was crazy. He started telling them dirty jokes. And David Bowie's hysterical laughing, and we're drinking and partying. You know, that was like a typical night of out, you know, in Manhattan.
Do you feel like that, like, intoxicating lifestyle led you to further on down the line get into drugs, or did you have to, like, how did you get into drugs by chance, if you don't mind sharing that?
For sure. Well, you know, I got into drugs. I mean, I started smoking marijuana at a young age. You know, that everybody was smoking in the 60s. You know, I was 13 years old. You know, everybody was using back then. You know, everybody was smoking weed. We started smoking weed, and then, you know, then we would take it. You know, what the kids were doing back then. I would take acid, you know. But when I got into Manhattan in the 70s, when I got older, when I was 19, 20, you know, I got introduced to cocaine. You know, everybody was blowing coke back then in all these clubs, and I just got caught up in it. And then eventually, you know, one day I woke up and I had an issue with it. You know, it didn't start out that way. But yeah, definitely the lifestyle definitely contributed to it, without a doubt. And it just snowballed, you know, I guess I just had that kind of compulsive personality where, you know, it just one day I woke up and I had an issue with the cocaine, and I had to address it. It was either address it or die. I mean, I couldn't go any further with it. You know, it was sort of starting to affect me physically and mentally. So I got to the point where either I was going to have to stop or I was going to die. And yeah, but the lifestyle definitely contributed to it. You know, I'm out every night. I'm in Manhattan. I'm Fat Andy's son. You know, I had a lot of money. You know, we're making a lot of money. You know, I'm getting in any club I want to get in, and everybody has coke. Everybody's drinking and partying. It definitely played into it.
Did you get called Small Anthony by chance? Did you have a nickname at all?
No. My nickname, they called me Rouge. My last name is Ruggiano, so they called me Rouge. Matter of fact, they started calling my son Little Rouge, but they called me Rouge. Anybody that calls me Rouge today knows me a long time.
Damn, the only nickname I got was Dumbass.
Yeah, I think, my name, my nickname's Old Johnny Boy. Do you think they would let me in the Mafia with that nickname, Johnny Boy?
What, with old Johnny Boy?
Yeah, Old Johnny Boy. Does that sound like a killer?
Are you Italian?
No, I'm just...
Listen, there's a lot of non-Italians that are in the mob that were tough killers. You know, Joe Watts, you know, I know my father had a guy around him, Irish Yorgie. He was a gangster. You know, Joe Watts was a gangster. He's English. You know, there's a lot of non-Italians that are mobbed up.
Was Jimmy Burke? He was Irish.
He was Irish. He was a foster child. You know, he was. I knew Jimmy well. You know, I knew his family. I knew his kids. I knew his wife. I was great friends with his daughter Kathy. I was good friends with his son Frankie that, you know, got killed. He was 100% Irish.
That is so were there actually back in the day like Irish sections and Italian sections and like Whatever happened to the Jewish mafia? Did they just start opening
No,
hospitals?
The Jewish mafia had a serious crew. My father serviced the Jewish mafia for many, many, many years. The Jewish mafia was always hooked up with guys, the wise guys from my father's neighborhood, Murder Incorporated, Happy Mayoni. I married Happy Mayoni's niece, Alice. It's funny you asked that because the Jewish mobs were always hooked up with the wise guys out of my father's neighborhood and always hooked up with my father's family. And my father serviced a lot of them. When I was a kid and I first started hanging out with my father, he would have dinner every Friday night at this bar in East New York on Fulton and Eastern Parkway every Friday. And everybody knew he was whole court there on Fridays. And these old timers used to come there, and they were always all like dressed up with the fedoras, and they were Jewish wise guys. And he told me they were Jewish wise guys, and he always was affiliated with them. They were tough guys. They were gangsters.
So, was there actually Irish people in Hell's Kitchen? Is that a true story?
Hell's Kitchen was 100% Irish. They ran the show there. The Westies before that. The Westies, I knew a couple of them. I did time. Kevin Kelly, he was one of the main Westies. He was my cellmate in Schuylkill Federal Prison for years. He was, with Jimmy Coonan and all them. Yeah, they ran the show. You couldn't do nothing on the West Side without going through them. They had everything. They had the docks. They even had the Broadway shows. When you go to the Broadway shows, and Broadway, and the old ladies and old men that give out the booklets you get in the beginning and bring you to your seats, those were all their aunts, their sisters, their mothers. They had everything on lockdown on the West Side.
What was your highest point in the mob, and what was your lowest point for you?
The highest point was probably for me it was two. It was in the 70s when I first started out. It was great up until the time my father went to prison. Then between 83 and 88, it was bad for me because I was, with the drugs, and my father was in prison and it wasn't good. Then in 88, everything started picking up, and it was really great. For me personally, between 88 and 96 is when I made the most money. I was doing really good. I got proposed. I was supposed to be getting made. And then I got arrested. I got arrested by the state in 95, and I went away. I took a plea. I got a 2 to 4. And when I was in state prison, I got indicted in Miami by the feds on another case. And I went down to Miami and I pleaded guilty, and I got 10 years, and I wind up getting out in 04. And after that, it was over for me. When I got out in 04, it was totally different. My father had died when I was in prison. John Gotti died when I was in prison. My father's partner, Tony Lee, died when I was right before I went to prison. So it was just, it was a different world. I came out to a different world, and that was pretty dark for me.
When your dad got locked up, did that put more of a target on your back, him being locked up, or was it just kind of just like things kind of just stayed the same pretty much for you?
No, pretty much things started staying the same. I mean, I had to deal with his lawyers. I was pretty much wrapped up in what was going on with him. Then I was going back and forth from Florida to New York. He went on trial 3 times. I actually even fixed his jury. The second time he went on trial, I even got to his jury, and we paid off one of his jurors $25,000, and we got a hung jury. So I was more or less wrapped up with him for those couple of years until he got convicted. Then I sort of, then the drugs took a little hold on me. And then when I got clean in 88, things started getting a lot better for me. John was the boss. I had a great relationship with John Gotti. He always looked out for me. Matter of fact, he bought me a car when I got out of treatment. The guy bought me a car and gave me $2,000, so I was rocking and rolling after that.
Was John Gotti was he really bad gambler?
Was he a bad gambler?
Yeah, I hear it. I hear the story.
He had no luck. If he didn't have bad luck, he had no luck at all. Yeah, he was a big gambler. He loved to gamble. And listen, gamblers don't win. The bookmaker. When I was a kid, and I first made my first couple of bets with a bookmaker, my friend Larry. His father was a legitimate guy, but his father was a gambler, and he had a bookmaker. And me and my friend Larry started betting $25 parlays with this bookmaker. And my father found out, and my father sat me down in the kitchen, and he told me, "Let me ask you a question." He says to me, who drives the shit boxes and who drives the Cadillacs? And I said, I don't know. What are you talking about? He goes, remember this. The gamblers drive the shit boxes and the bookmakers drive the Cadillacs. He said, so which one do you want to be, a gambler or a bookmaker? Yeah, John bet on everything. John had a guy, this guy, Jimmy Irish, this poor guy. He had a guy that he used to send to Aqueduct Racetrack every day to bet horses for him. And the guy used to have to run to the phone, call up who, God forbid this guy ever bet the wrong horse. He used to faint. He was afraid to go back to 101st Avenue. You know, bet 20,000 on a fight. I remember one of the Duran Leonard fights. He bet 20,000 on. I don't know if he bet. I think he bet Duran. He was a big gambler, but we all gambled.
What do you think made Carlos Gambino so scary?
He was very intelligent. I mean, he was Sicilian. He was intelligent. He was the boss a lot of years. You know, he was. My father said the guy was super intelligent. So now you got a guy that's super intelligent. That's that's a murderer. I mean, you know, how much more scarier does it get?
So he was cunning, very cunning. That is.
Who's the scariest guy to you? Like.
I think we asked that. Didn't we?
The scariest person I ever met.
I think funniest.
Yeah, we did both of those. Didn't we already ask you who was the scariest already? I think so. Let's do it again.
No, you never asked me who the scariest was. You asked me who the funniest was. Who the toughest was. The
there
scariest,
we go.
Well, I mean, the scariest guy that I knew everybody was scared of was Roy DeMeo, who was, you know, the kill, you know, he was a serial killer. I remember when he used to walk into the Ravenite in the 70s, he would walk into the Ravenite and like everybody sort of got a little quiet. Like he would come on a Saturday to see O'Neill or somebody and everybody would like get a little quiet when he walked in. He was kind of scary. And a couple of, you know, like, especially what happened was in the 70s that people, you know, everybody, like I said, everybody was blowing coke. But then it came a point where people started freebasing cocaine. Ooh. And a couple of wise guys I knew that were killers were freebasing cocaine, and they were doing some violent, crazy things behind, you know, using this drug. And I sort of stood away from them because they were catching delusions on people. And so that was a little scary, but I would say Roy DeMeo probably was the scariest person that people used to run into.
So did you guys have
I was never really personally scared of anybody. I just knew what was what, and I knew what I would do, certain things that I wouldn't do with other guys, you know, but that was about it. But I was never really scared of anybody.
No, you really can't be.
Yeah. What was your specialty? What was your like strong suit? Were you you heist? Did you... What made you money?
Well, I was good. I was good with numbers. I knew how to set up bookmaking offices, number offices. I ran a vending company. I mean, I did everything. I listen. In one day I committed. So I had at one time in the 90s I had a stolen car ring. So we had two chop shops. I had a credit card ring. We were stealing with credit cards. I had a vending company with gambling machines. I had a Shylock business. I had my hands in everything. You know, I was selling swag, stolen goods. I had my hand in everything.
Do you feel like
I was a businessman?
Do you feel like you start out slow and you progress into like as they start trusting you more, you get bigger? Like gigs. Yeah. I don't know if that's
definitely.
word.
Yeah, my life in the mob, it progressed. Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, the first job I had, my father put me to work in a blackjack game. You know, there was no casinos then before Atlantic City. I mean, you had to go to Vegas to go to a casino. So, you know, I started out working in a blackjack game, and then I worked in a dice game, and you know, but they were all big money games. I mean, people would go there and lose $20,000, $30,000. You know, it was no little nickel and dime games. They were all mob operated. All the five families had pieces of the dice games. So I started out, you know, little by little. You know, my father worked. You know, I worked in the blackjack game. Then I worked in the dice game, and then I worked in the number office. And I got arrested in the number office. You know, I having bar fights. You know, then a little violence here, a little violence there, and it just progressed.
Your children, I'm sure, obviously know what you're doing and know what you did. And did you ever worry about them following in your footsteps?
Oh yeah, especially my son. I made it a point to discourage him a lot. Even, you know, like I said, I went to prison when he was 13. Those were dangerous years. Between 13, I came out, he was 22. And I made it a point for him to, you know, stay in school. And I always got him jobs. I always told him, you know, that I'm not going to make the same mistakes with him that my father made with me. You know, I knew at that point in time that the mob was no life for him. And, you know, I had a different belief system or a different mindset than my father at that point. And I made it a point for him to stay, you know, to stay legit, go to work. And he still works. He's a hard worker. The kid, thank God.
Yes,
that's great.
Definitely.
My daughter's a little traumatized. My daughter's from my second wife. My first wife was her grandfather was a wise guy. You know, they had different experiences with us. You know, my son lived in the neighborhood, so he was like Fat Andy's grandson, and he got free pizza. You know, he played it up a little bit too, my son. You know, he enjoyed being Fat Andy's and Anthony's son and grandson, you know. So he, you know, Ronnie One Arm would give him free pizza, and, you know, he got money from wise guys. My daughter, she, you know, her mother was legitimate. They lived out in Comac. She was a little traumatized. She, you know, she didn't know what was going on. She thought I was in the army when I was in prison. Then she found that I was in prison. Then she found some newspaper articles about my father, about some murders that he was allegedly a suspect in. And she didn't really know what to do with that information. She was a kid. And so she sort of, she had some issues. You know, we had to put her in therapy. She was sort of a little traumatized by finding out that these two loving pet people, you know, her grandfather and her father were, you know, violent criminals. And so she had some issues to deal with, but she's fine now.
Did you guys, what was like a typical mob talk? Did you guys have like your own lingo and stuff when you guys were having conversation? You like,
yeah,
forget about it. What am I, stupid?
So I whistle and snap a lot.
You know, like, yeah, listen, the guy owes me 5 dimes, you know, like, when is he going to pay me? You know, like, so a dime is 1,000, you know, the guy owes me a nickel. That means the guy owes me 500, you know, stuff like that. Little slang words,
Like,
you know.
It's like friend of ours or friend of, is that like a thing?
Well, a friend of ours is a wise guy. A friend of mine is just a friend of my associate. So if a wise guy introduces another wise guy and says he's a friend of ours, that means the guy's a made guy. If I introduce you as this is a friend of mine, he's just a friend of mine. You know what I mean? Like, he's just an associate of mine.
When you look back, do you, I don't know if it really matters to you at this point now, but do you ever wish that like you got to that you were able to become a made guy before you got locked up? Or does it at this point you kind of
I was on the verge. Well, when I got out of jail in 2004, so I was proposed. They passed my name around and everything got approved. Everything got approved. And I was sent for by a captain in the Gambino family, this guy Lenny, sent for me and he said, listen, everything was approved. You know, your name went around, because I was on the fence with it still. I didn't want to tell them no. I didn't want to get it straightened out because I don't want anybody to catch a delusion on me. So he said, everything's done. He goes, listen, you got permission to go on sit downs. You're recognized as a wise guy. You don't need anybody representing you. It's just a matter of when we're going to have the ceremony. We're probably going to have it maybe around Christmas time, but you know, it's a done deal. And a week later, I got arrested for murder. It never happened.
Was there a code of conduct that was in place, like don't mess with this person's wife, or like do not?
Oh yeah, there was
don't
rules.
Talk shit to the capo.
Don't raise your hands. Don't raise your hands to another made member. Don't go with anybody's wife. Yeah, there was rules. I mean, don't sell drugs, but you know, a lot of the rules were broken. You know, some people paid the price for that, and some people got away with it.
Did you interact a lot with other families, other mafia families, or was that something you guys stayed like clan-like? Were you guys just like, well, we know they're there? Or how did you interact with other families?
No, my father's crew interacted with all the families. No, I had friends in every family. I had good friends in all 5 families. My father did business. We did business like there was a captain in the Genovese family named Jimmy Knapp. He was a big number banker, big money. We turned in our number work to him. You know, this other guy, Fritzy Giovanelli, he was in the Genovese family. We did business with him. We did a lot of business with Paulie Vario's crew. He was in the Lucchese's. We were partners with them in dice games. No, we did business with everybody. We did. I mean, we interacted with everybody. My father ran the Tapers Union for the mob and for the 5 families. You know, everybody had a piece of the construction companies. We did business with everybody. There was a lot of animosity. Don't get me wrong. A lot of jealousy, a lot of bullshit, backstabbing. But my father personally and his crew, our crew, we did good with other families. My father was well liked by everybody, really, basically.
Say some people broke a rule. Does the punishment severity depend on the rule that you broke, or is it all just pretty across the board punishment wise?
No, I mean, it depends on what it was. Some people would get chased or get shelved. They would call it put on the shelf. So that means you're not recognized and nobody could do business with you. They used to get chased. And if it was really severe, you would get killed, back then, it was a death sentence. I had friends of mine, I have friends of mine that got killed, they broke the rules, and they got caught out there and they were killed. My father had a couple of guys killed because one guy robbed something off. Speaking of Jewish guys, my father had the Jewish crew with him, and this guy stuck them up. They had a club in on Kings Highway, and this guy Mando stuck them up, and my father had him killed for it, because it was my father's. They were with my father, so my father had the guy killed. Another guy, Danny, there was a wire going around that he possibly was an informant. My father had him killed. It all depends on what you did. I know a lot of guys that just got chased. Don't come around no more. Like this guy Mike Talley, he was a captain in the Gambino family, and he did something really wrong to Neil Della Croce, who was the underboss, and he should have got killed. It should have been a death sentence, but because he grew up with Neil gave him a pass and just chased him out of New York, and the guy, never was seen again. He just moved upstate or somewhere. So yeah, it all depends on what hand you got dealt.
Hit him with the cereal.
Okay, actually, I got to ask you. I actually have two questions before.
I got one more too. So.
I want to ask you actually one more. Before we get to the real question here,
okay.
What it was like the craziest story your dad has ever told you, where you're just like, holy shit? Like, was there a story he said to you?
I'm gonna tell you the truth. The craziest story he ever told me. I'm gonna tell you the truth. This is not what normal fathers and son conversations that the society has with their children. But this was the stories that him and I talked about that I was like in awe of, which is crazy when I think of it now. So when I started working with him and he started schooling me about the life and everything, and he started telling me things he did, like the work he did with the violence and everything. So he told me a story. In the 60s, there was a crew of guys going around robbing mobbed up crap dice games. Now, dice games back then were really big money, and all the 5 families had a piece of the dice games, and it was a time slot. Like the Gambino family had the game between 1 and 4. The Genovese had another game in another spot in New York between 6 and 10. Then the Lucchese's had a game in another spot in New York between 12 and 3. And everybody and all the families had, like, one family was the bank, one family wrote the numbers, one family Shylocked the money. So all the 5 families benefited from these big floating dice games before the casinos. And there was a crew of guys going around robbing them. And Neil Della Croce was the underboss of the Gambinos. They found out who they were. There was 3 of them. And another wise guy knew them. So they were lured to so the wise guy that knew them was told to bring them to a warehouse for something. I don't remember what it was for. And my father was in the warehouse with a couple of other guys, and the guy that brought them there thought they were just going to get shot, like executed, just shot. But Neil wanted an example made out of them, and the guy that lured them there didn't know it yet. And when they walked in to the building, my father and who he was with started hitting them with axes.
Holy shit.
And the guy that brought them there flipped out, didn't expect it, and started screaming and ran for the door. And my father had to run after him, and my father ran after him. My father shot him in the back of the head. So, that's like a scene out of the movie,
Yeah.
that was like a story that, that was, so that was like, that was crazy, but that's, that was the life. That's what, that's why it's such a intriguing life to people, because here's a bunch of guys, they'll do this crazy thing in a warehouse and then go home to, he had me. I was born. I was a kid. He would do that and then come home and sit on the couch and watch television with me.
Well, that's a good fucked up story that I probably won't sleep well tonight. I guess I'm gonna switch it up and we'll let you hit him with the heat. Who was the best cook in the Mafia?
My God! Now you're gonna start a mob war. Who's the best cook? Well, my father really was a good cook. He was really a good cook. His partner was a really good cook, and there was another guy, a captain in the Genovese family, who was really, really good friends with my father, named Ciro Perone. He was a really good cook too. So I would say them three guys were really good cooks. John Gotti had another good cook. Guy used to cook on Saturdays when he became the boss. I don't remember his name, but those were the best cooks I had. Believe it or not, a lot of mob guys cook really good.
I
would love to see you guys on a mob cook-off.
Gordon Ramsay.
That's a good. That would be really good. That would be like my father and his partner always used to have arguments. My father, they made like my father's best dish was like pasta vazul. He made that really good. His partner Tony Lee made really good soups. My father actually taught my mother how to cook. My mother didn't know how to cook at all when he married her. He taught her how to cook. But there was a lot of good cooks in the mob, and they love to cook. Listen, my father loved to eat, loved to drink, eat, listen to music. They were partiers. They loved life. I mean, when they were, because they always knew, I guess, in their head they could be killed or go to jail. So they lived every minute of the day. I mean, they lived life.
You listen to this Netflix Mafia cook-off. There we go.
Yeah, that's right.
Who's gonna get whacked this week?
Gordon Ramsay's the host.
Like when I was in Detroit, I was living in Detroit, so I went to this Italian restaurant that was supposed to be owned by the mob, because they got a mob crew in Detroit. And I walked in, and the waitress asked me, like, I ordered something, and she asked me what kind of noodles I wanted, and I looked, noodles. I said, noodles you put in chicken soup. What kind of macaronis do you have? She was like,
well, speaking of food, actually, I have a pretty,
here it goes,
maybe the most interesting question of this whole thing. Is cereal soup?
The cereal soup, the Bastina, they stopped selling it?
Like, what are your thoughts? Because we ask this every week, like, what people think is cereal soup. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, is it soup? Is cereal soup? What do you think?
Cereal? You mean breakfast cereal?
Yeah, like, is it soup or is it just like its own thing?
Of course it's not soup. It's just it's cereal. How could it be soup?
That's well, I mean, fair.
What do you think it is?
You're the only one that's actually said no.
We weren't expecting a direct answer.
I never heard cereal called soup until you just mentioned it.
Yeah, our last guest got philosophical on it.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, so
we got gazpacho a couple times. We got
no.
So
I never heard that before. Cereal, to me, cereal and soup is soup.
I dig it.
Yeah,
I dig it, man. Well, do you have anything you'd like to plug or anything you'd like to shout out? And
well, just my podcast is really doing well. Please, anybody out there, reformgangsters.com, my Patreon, just come on. I'm on every Tuesday night. Come on, ask me questions. We have a good time. I have topics. People call in, they ask me questions. I also have a recovery helpline that I try to help people that are looking for, to get off drugs and alcohol. It's 855-963-2113. But it's also on my website and my podcast. If anybody needs help or knows somebody needs help, I have this 24/7 helpline that they could call into. But and my podcast, and I'm working on some other things. But that I have a Netflix show coming out. It should be coming out in 2 or 3 months. That they're still editing it. I'll have more information on that as I get it. But they're in the last stages now. They're dubbing in my voice into 120 languages.
Oh, wow.
So
Dang.
that should be cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
What would I
that's
sound
it,
like
really.
in Japanese?
Yeah, and we can't wait for that mob
Yeah.
cook-off for real. Somebody,
Yeah, that sounds
gotta
good.
make this happen.
we got to make this happen. And
I'm gonna talk to Michael Francis about that. Maybe me and him could do something with that.
That'd be great.
I would watch.
Yeah.
I would definitely watch. Well, Indianapolis, it's been great.
Yeah, we appreciate you guys for watching another episode of the Angry Turtle Podcast. Tune in for more because we got so many more great guests coming on. We love you guys. Peace.
Peace.